Yeah, my parents are kind of different musically. My dad's a very R&B kind of a guy. Growing up, I remember listening to the OJs, Muddy Waters, Sam and Dave, stuff like that. Mom's a little more pop. The music that kind of reminds me of my mom is like Bobby Darin, Rod Stewart, the Everly Brothers, but they're both big rock fans, specifically Elvis Presley and the Rolling Stones. And my mom adores the Rolling Stones. And my parents, this is an interesting story. My parents actually lived in Hawaii when they first got married. So they were at the famous Elvis Aloha from Hawaii concert. And I believe they paid $5 to do it because
Yeah.
that was a donation for cancer research concert. And so it was pay what you can.
Hmm.
And they were listening to, mom was inside doing something, dad was outside doing something, and she comes running out and she said, "There's still tickets, let's go." And they just went down the hill and they were able to get to the Elvis Aloha from Hawaii show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. Today, we are getting off the Bruce Springsteen wagon, but he will probably come up as he normally does. I have one of my long distance friends, one of my podcast partners, and just overall great person, Xan Sprouse, on the phone. Hey, Xan, how you doing?
Hey Jesse, how are you doing? You're also
I
an overall great person, by the way.
Well,
So
thank you so much. Yeah, Zan is a co-host of a multitude of podcasts that we will talk about later. But we first got together when she was guest hosting on Doctor Who with Charles and I. And so I've been kind of, hey, Zan, join me. And we finally got our scheduled, worked out. So I am thrilled you're here. Tell everyone a little elevator pitch. Tell us about yourself.
yeah, just yeah, I'm Xan Sprouse, and like you said, I am kind of a nerd. Love me some Doctor Who. I'm science fiction horror movie type of nerd. Um, the the one thing I like to say as my elevator pitch for myself is Pez and pinball. um, because I do collect Pez dispensers. I've been collecting Pez dispensers since 1992,
Oh, how cool.
and I, whew, I counted early in the year, and so I'm probably close to 2,900 at this point.
Wow.
2,900 Pez dispensers, yeah. And then another one of my hobbies that I do is I play pinball. I actually, when we're done here, I'm going to go to a pinball tournament.
Oh, how fun.
I'm not
Now,
that great, but I have a good time with it. And so yeah, Pez, pinball, movies and music, those are my things.
what are do you what is your rarest or what Pez dispenser you're most proud of?
The Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Ah,
That was from the 60s, and they did a series of horror, universal horror. There's a
right.
creature, there's a Frankenstein, and there is a wolf man.
Oh, neat.
And I am lucky enough to have all three of them, but the creature that I have is it is my favorite dispenser that I own.
Uh-huh.
And it was one of the 31 dispensers that Chris got me for my 31st birthday. So he had me open them in order, and then the last one was the creature, and he's beautiful. He's pristine because the Pez creature has these fins on the side of his head that
Right.
are kind of thin, and so they can crack. And
Hmm.
he's got like little like open mouth, and then the mouth can crack, but he's perfect. He's absolutely pristine.
How
So
do you display them?
just on shelves. What I did, I have a room downstairs in my house that when we first looked at the house, it had some built-in shelving, and I was like, Pez room when we buy this house. And what I did is I went to Home Depot and I had them sort of, the pre-covered shelving
Yeah.
pieces. I had them cut I had them cut pieces that were like 8 inches, then 7 inches, then 5 inches. So then I just have these shelves that I could just stack on them in the
Hmm.
inside. I have these shelf pieces that I stacked one on top of the other in these built-in shelves. So now I have like risers for them.
Oh, nice.
So then I've got, so I've got shelves where they're like kind of 5 or 6 deep. And then I have the Container Store has a thing they call tchotchke shelves. If you're looking for them, that's what they are. They're
Okay.
only about 1.5 inches wide, 1.5 inches, 2 inches wide. So then on the rest of the walls, I have those tchotchke shelves, and that's where the other Pez can go. And then also from the Container Store, I have these like, I don't know, like 8x5 Cambro type things. 10,
Hmm.
actually more, they're probably like 10 inches. And they also have stair steps. And then that's where I keep all my older Pez that was made before like 1985, didn't have those little feet on the bottom.
Right.
So they're very easy to topple.
Yes.
And because they're old, they can be brittle, and I want them to topple in a small space if they are going to topple.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
that's how, yeah, I have a room with a lot of little shelving.
That's kind of cool. That's neat.
And because I have the Pez room, I don't own any pinball machines.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I don't have any space for a pinball machine.
Uh-huh. I love that. The Tyler Mahan Cohen does the um, Cocaine and Rhinestones podcast about the
Hmm.
history of country music. And there was an episode that talked a lot about pinball machines and how they
Oh
used to
yeah.
be for gambling. And that
Hmm.
there were, yeah, so that was a fascinating, I had not heard of that. All I remember is, throwing my quarters in a machine and,
Hmm.
loving to play it as a kid. And I probably haven't played a pinball machine in years, but I now that I want to go do it. That's
Yeah, it's
fun.
there's a guy named Roger Sharp, who
Hmm.
is a fantastic pinball player, who actually played pinball in front of Congress to prove that pinball is a game of skill now instead of chance. Because when
Yeah.
pinball first started, it was like Plinko.
Yeah.
And if you won a free game or you won a couple of cents, that's why they thought it was gambling, which is
Yeah.
one major reason why Fiorello LaGuardia outlawed it in New York specifically.
Right.
But when they started putting the flippers in, it became a game of skill.
Right.
And so Roger Sharp played against a congressman, and Roger's like, okay, I'm going to hit this shot. And he did it. And I'm going to hit this shot. And he did it. And the congressman just kept draining the ball. And that's when they realized, okay, yeah, maybe this is a game of skill. And even if you do win a free game, it's not actually a monetary payout. So
Yeah.
he helped pinball become legal again in the 1970s throughout the country.
All right. That's very cool.
Yeah, don't ask me trivia about my hobbies because that's all they'll
No,
talk about.
I'm loving this. Hey, where else can you go to get this? You mentioned that Chris, who's your husband,
Hmm.
gave you 31 Pez dispensers for your 31st birthday. Is
Hmm.
this a theme with you? Because I was going to ask you a little bit. I'm going to jump ahead of my agenda. You did something for your recent birthday.
Hmm.
So talk to me a little bit
I
about
did.
that.
Yes, and I'll show you
Okay.
how that turned out. My recent birthday, I turned 45, and because it was kind of a pandemic birthday, I really couldn't do a lot. So I asked people if they could to either send me 45s, like
Hmm.
7-inch singles,
Yeah.
or I also started a playlist on Spotify and to add some songs
Right.
that you love, or that make you think of me, or that you want me to hear, or that you think I'll love, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
So a lot of people did the stuff on the Spotify, but then I got this gigantic box of 45s
That is neat.
that I have organized by who gave them to me.
Hmm.
And as you can see, you might not be able to see it, but there is a Jesse Jackson section here,
Yes. Yes, there was.
because
Yeah, I went. I
Jesse.
did. I went to Amazon. I'm like, okay, well, I've got to find, I've got to send her at least a couple of Bruce 45s. And so I found a Bruce 45
Mhm.
and then you're like, oh, here's an Elvis 45. This would be fun. And so,
And
so
it is
yeah,
what, and you sent me "Suspicious Minds," like one of my all-time favorite Elvis songs. So
yeah, absolutely.
that was awesome.
Do you have a jukebox?
No, I don't. I have two record players. I have one that I'm in my music room right now. As you can see,
Yes.
it's not the cleanest thing in the world, but I have those are my records over there. I have a
Okay.
record player that's a record player under the Devo Energy Dome. I keep the Energy Dome on it to keep it from getting too dusty.
Right.
And then downstairs I have a Bluetooth record player that can go anywhere in the house.
Okay.
Um, But I just thought it would be fun to do 45s. My friend Shelly bought me the box and got a huge ton of 45s on Amazon Marketplace, and she bought me a necklace that was one of the spindle spiders.
Hmm.
Chris got me 45 45s, so that
Of
was
course,
fun.
because he's awesome.
And friends just sort of came over and brought ones that they thought would be fun for me or that they liked, or um, and I had my one friend, my friends Josh and Jackie. They couldn't find a 45 of this, but they were able to find the album that has Disco Lady on it, which is the song that was #1 the year I was born.
Okay,
so
very nice.
so it was I just thought it would be really fun. I think when you have an age that is something, I think that's a fun thing to do.
Oh,
Like
I think that's a great idea. That's
yeah.
that's so much fun.
So
Well,
so when I'm 52, I'm hoping people give me decks of cards.
okay, that's that you're already thinking ahead. That sounds great. Yeah. All right. I always like to go back to the beginning. So talk about, where did you grow up, and was your family into a lot of music? Did they listen to a lot of music?
We had a lot of. Well, I grew up here. I currently live in Columbus, Ohio, and I was born in Newark, Ohio, just a little bit east of here, and grew up mainly in Central Ohio. I grew up in Worthington, Ohio, which is just north of Columbus, with a
Okay.
little bit of a stint in Kettering, which is
Okay.
a suburb of Dayton. So Midwestern Ohio, born and bred. I still love it here. So, um, yeah, my parents are kind of different musically. My dad's a very R&B kind of a guy. Growing up, I remember listening to the OJ's, Muddy Waters, Sam and Dave, stuff like that. Mom's a little more pop. The music that kind of reminds me of my mom is like Bobby Darin, Rod Stewart, the Everly Brothers, but they're both big rock fans. Specifically Elvis Presley and the Rolling Stones, and my mom adores the Rolling Stones. And my parents, this is an interesting story. My parents actually lived in Hawaii when they first got married, so they were at the famous Elvis Aloha from Hawaii concert.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I believe they paid $5 to do it because
Yeah.
that was a donation for cancer research concert.
Right.
Um, and so it was pay what you can.
Hmm.
And they were listening to. Mom was inside doing something, dad was outside doing something, and she comes running out and she said, "There's still tickets, let's go." And they just went down the hill and they were able to get to the Elvis Aloha from Hawaii show.
That is
So
hilarious.
isn't that
That
isn't
is a
that
great
bizarre?
story.
So, and my dad has seen Hendrix. Like he just
Mhm.
sort of got lucky and was able to see Hendrix. I forget where. So
Yeah.
they've seen some stuff, but as a kid, my parents were pretty good about having current radio stations on in the car. So I heard, and I'm thinking like before the age of 5 is what I'm thinking
Yeah.
of. Like, just listen to Billy Joel, Fleetwood Mac, Pink Floyd, some of that earlier, like later 70s rock type stuff. I wasn't hearing a lot of that punk new wave stuff on the radio,
Yeah.
but my first favorite song that I ever had was Midnight Train to Georgia by Gladys Knight and the Pips.
Great song.
So and I feel like my young life is very segmented because when you're a kid and you move, things are
Right.
very specific.
Yeah.
So we moved to Kettering when I was 6. And so, before that, I was very, into soundtracks, like, things like Annie, Great Muppet Caper, Muppet Movie. I love
Yeah.
the Muppets, still love the music of the Muppets. I think Joe Raposo is one of the greatest songwriters ever, as is Paul Williams.
Yeah.
Um, but when we moved to Kettering was around the time that MTV was a thing.
Mhm.
So around that time, that's when I sort of got into Prince and Madonna, Cyndi Lauper, The Cars, Men at Work, Fleetwood Mac,
Yeah.
and watched a lot of videos. Like one of my favorite videos still to this day is "Keep Feeling Fascination" by the Human League. It's the one
Yes.
where they live. I don't if you've never seen it. They kind of live in the "You Are Here" dot on a
Hmm.
map. So whenever you walk into that dot, everything's pink.
Okay.
It's hilarious. And so then as I got a little bit older and we moved back to Worthington, you know, Madonna, Prince, and Cindy have been consistent favorites since probably 1983.
Sure.
um, but then I got a little older and then was in middle school. And then that's when, Janet Jackson, Whitney Houston, Tom Petty, Tears for Fears, and U2 came into the picture. Um, and they were probably my favorite band till about mid high school.
Hmm.
So yeah, as a kid, kind of just sort of what was on MTV was when were kind of my favorites.
Yeah. Um, so much great music from Prince and Madonna, during the 80s. And, the big four icons obviously is Bruce, Michael Jackson,
Mhm.
Prince, and Madonna. For those, I think if you were doing a bracket of musical acts in the 80s, they would be the top four, right, of the seeds,
Yeah,
of the
I think
bracket. And
so.
so, yeah,
Yeah.
so that's very cool. So you started mentioning high school and college. Did you branch out a little bit on some different music, or you stay pretty close to pop culture?
I branched out a little bit. High school was all about what we called back then college rock for
Yeah, sure.
me,
Yeah.
and discovering bands that were on the upperclassmen's t-shirts.
Yeah.
Um, I did. This is a weird thing that I did as a kid, but I went to a small high school in Worthington. We have an alternative program called the Linworth Alternative Program, and it's not a private school. It's part of the Worthington system, the Worthington public system, but it is an application-based school.
Okay.
It's very small. It's more university type learning where you have small classes and the focus is on papers and tests rather than daily homework.
Okay.
So I went to a high school of about 150 people. So, my first day of high school, it's like wham, you're right there with everybody from the people you may or may not know, because maybe only a couple of people from your middle school came to this high school with you, and then seniors everywhere.
Yeah.
So I remember being a freshman and putting in my very first Columbia House order,
Yes.
and some of the bands I chose were things that I had seen on upperclassmen's t-shirts, bands like the House of Love or the Pixies or In Spiral Carpets. That was a
Yeah.
lot of stuff that I listened to in high school as well. But I also did a lot of playing catch up on 80s bands that I kind of got a little bit of on MTV, but they didn't have a ton of radio play.
Yeah.
Because as a kid, I had a tape deck that I could tape things off of the radio, but not a lot of money. So I'm not going to record stores a lot. And I'm an only child. So I didn't have older siblings to teach me about music. And I have two older cousins and they lived in Cleveland. So it's not like they were sharing records with me or giving me stuff or telling me who to. So a lot of what I did is I kind of went back into the 80s and picked out some of the more new wave stuff. So um, my high school was very Talking Heads oriented and all that implies. David Byrne's solo record Uh-Oh came out I think in 1982, and I think I wore a hole in that, if it's possible to wear a hole in something with a laser.
Sure.
Simple Minds, Still U2, Devo, Go-Go's, Kirsty MacColl, Billy Bragg, REM, The Clash, Stone Roses, Yaz. And high school is really when I got into Elvis Costello, who
Okay.
is still to this day my all-time favorite. And then as I got into college, I started branching out a little bit with that as well, staying with some of that new wave, like Joe Jackson, Kate Bush. But then
That's
there were also, doing more Peter Gabriel, like keeping up with the Peter Gabriel thing.
yeah. Kate Bush is one of my wife's favorites artists.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, she's one of my all-time favorites. But then we also had things in the 90s, like that's when Beck first came on the scene,
Yeah.
and Cake first came on the scene.
Yeah.
So um, that's sort of where I stayed in college, and I think I kind of also went backwards a little bit and became a big fan of New Order and Joy Division
Hmm.
and bands like that.
So a pretty diverse musical palette.
Very diverse musical palette. I'm not even talking too much about how in the 80s and 90s I also got into a lot of hip hop and rap. Like
Yeah.
um, some of my favorites are of course Salt and Peppa. I love MC Light. I
Yeah.
love Wu Tang, PD. All kinds of EPMD. I'm saying
Yeah,
the wrong things. I'm still a little hungover. I apologize.
that's all right.
Um, so
So Zan,
so
you
lots
mentioned,
of stuff.
yeah, you mentioned Elvis Costello, and so I want to ask a
Mhm.
little bit about that. Can you articulate what about him and his music spoke to you so much?
Um, I think what did it to me, and this is an interesting thing because I was always, um, when I was young, I was kind of a Paul McCartney dismisser. I have a little more respect for Paul now, but I was more of a John than I was a Paul as a kid.
Sure.
But what got me into Elvis Costello was the song Veronica, which is written by Paul McCartney.
Okay.
um, so that was that was what got me there. And then when I got into high school, there were just some things around that just sort of seemed like that was where he would go. Like I had a teacher that liked him and there were other kids that liked him, and I think I was just going to the library and checking things out, and one day I found a copy of My Aim Is True, and I listened to that like crazy, and I just went sort of nuts for it. And I don't know if it was Allison or Blame It on Kane that really got me. I think Blame It on Kane was one that really, really got me. I absolutely love that song. But and then the Mighty Like a Rose album came out when I was in high school,
Okay.
which was very different for him, but have some songs on it that I absolutely has some songs on it that I love, like something like Georgie and Her Rival, which is kind of a goofy song, but um that song as a teenager who was experiencing teenage angst was very spoke to me a lot about how you sometimes like people that you can't stand,
Okay.
that you can have crushes on people that just aren't good for you or that you just don't mesh with, and trying to think of other ones that really really got to me. Oh, the song off of Blood and Chocolate, I Want You, which is actually um written about BB Buell, the groupie and Liv Tyler's mother,
Yeah.
is extremely powerful and extremely scathing. And that is one of my favorites because it starts out and you think it's going to be this sweet love song. And oh, it's not. And I
Yeah.
think I liked the duplicity of that. And because when you decide you're like Elvis, like in 1992, and you realize he's put out an album every year since 1977,
Yeah.
it's daunting. So, you would buy records as you could. And I think one of the first ones I bought was his record Get Happy, because it's a bunch of short songs. It's like, it's bang for your buck. I know a lot of people that's the first one they bought. And there was just something about that record that I felt so connected to, because living in Columbus, Ohio, um, Elvis Costello very famously got a lot of bad press for getting in a bar fight one time with I want to say Stephen Stills and Bonnie Bramlett for sure.
Okay.
And they were having an argument about, American music being better than British music and vice versa. And Elvis was drunk and he said something very nasty about Ray Charles,
Uh-huh.
about his eye condition and his race, if you can think of what he might have called him.
Yes. Okay.
Um, and I want to say Bonnie Bramlett, knocked Elvis onto a table. Like it was a bad bar fight, and
Yeah.
that happened at the Holiday Inn downtown in Columbus.
Oh, how funny.
And his and the album Get Happy is sort of his, like, sorry, I'm a nice guy. Let's get happy. So that I loved that album for that reason. It has great songs on it, like New Amsterdam's on that one. And then and then I finally got around to buying Imperial Bedroom, and that's like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing I've ever heard. So especially later in high school, my small high school did this thing, we called it Walkabout, where the second half of your senior year, you don't go to school, you do some sort of internship. And I did an internship with our public television station. They put out a magazine back when people put out magazines, and I worked for them. And I would take the bus back and forth from Ohio State to my house in Worthington, and I would be on Ohio State's campus trying to catch the bus. And when you're waiting for the bus, what do? There's nothing to do. Let's go shop at the record store. It's like, oh, hey, here's an Elvis record I don't have. Here's an Elvis record I don't have. So my senior year of high school really beefed up my Elvis collection.
I did the same thing in 1977. I graduated high school, and I first discovered the Beach Boys in the summer.
Oh, yeah.
I picked up that 8-track. And so for years, I would go to any record store I found, go to the B's and search to see, is there any albums I didn't have from the Beach Boys?
That's what I did.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Have you been able to see Elvis perform live?
Yes, I have.
How many times?
Oh my gosh, that's a good question. Probably about 8. I think, at least. It's hard to say which is the best time, but it's narrowed down to 2.
Okay.
And Chris and I saw Elvis Costello. We had tickets to see Elvis Costello, and the opener was Billy Bob Thornton, who, if you get a chance to see him, he's great. He's like a great bar band. He tells great stories.
Okay.
And he's fun. But the day we went to that concert is the day Chris asked me to marry him.
Oh,
so that's a really
sweet.
Good one.
Yeah, that's sweet.
And then I try to, because I'm that kind of jerk, where I try to be like, I try to do like weird inside joke kind of things when I go places. So if it's at all possible, whenever I see Elvis, I wear a green shirt and red shoes.
Okay.
In honor of the song Green Shirt and the song The Angels Want to Wear My Red Shoes.
Oh, very nice.
So I try to always do that. So there was an Elvis show he did. He brought back the Spinning Songbook tour. And he was doing the song God Give Me Strength that he wrote for the movie Grace of My Heart.
Great movie, by the way.
It's a fantastic movie. Yeah. He came down into the audience and walked around with that, and so Elvis and I danced to that song.
That's nice.
That was one of the most amazing experiences of my entire life. And unfortunately, when Chris tried to take a picture, somebody bumped him.
Oh no.
So we have no picture of the actual thing, but then afterwards we waited outside and I said, "Hey, I'm the woman that was dancing with you. Can we just pretend we're dancing so my husband can get a picture because somebody bumped him?" And so I have a picture of me and Elvis holding hands like we're dancing. But
how very fun.
So that was incredible. And the first time I met him, I want to say it was Chris's birthday. We saw him. And we waited out back and we were able to see him. And I was just stunned. Like, I was totally stunned. By the time we got home, I was just sobbing. Like, oh my God, I can't believe it. I just did.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have seen him quite a few times.
That's great.
It's been great.
Grace of My Heart is one of those movies that I recommend to people, when we're talking about it, because every time I listen to the CD, I want to watch the movie, and every time I watch the movie, I want to listen to the CD.
Right.
And for those of you who don't know, the premise is it's kind of a reimagining of Carole King's, among other songwriters, but mostly a Carole King type persona. And it goes through her whole career. But what was amazing is they took songwriters from those eras and paired them with a modern songwriter to write the soundtrack. So it's all original songs in different styles of the different 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s. And it's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's wonderful.
Yeah. That's good. So let's talk a little Bruce. I know because we were talking Doctor Who, and I mentioned something, and you immediately knew. I think it was like a Tunnel of Love reference or that album. So you at least have a fair knowledge of Bruce. So talk to me a little bit about, do you remember when you first heard Bruce, and just any thoughts you want to share about, Mr. Springsteen?
Well, the first time I think I was ever conscious of Bruce, I didn't realize it was Bruce.
Yeah.
Because I think the first time Bruce ever came into my realm is when I would is when I heard Robin Williams do Fire as Elmer Fudd.
Yes, absolutely.
So, and of course, probably Santa Claus is Coming to Town.
Right.
Um, and of course, Manfred Mann, which is still amazing to me that that is the only song by Bruce Springsteen that's ever been #1. Like, I still can't believe
It is kind of
that.
crazy, isn't it?
That's crazy. Like, how is Born in the USA not a #1 song? Like, how did
Right.
that happen?
Yeah.
But speaking of Born in the USA, in 1984, I was 8 years old,
Yeah.
and
Right.
Born in the USA was a monster of an album.
Right.
And I was looking at it earlier just to refamiliarize myself with it because it's been a while since I listened to it, and I was just like, there's like 3 songs on this that weren't like radio hits. Like, it's a
Yes.
huge, huge record. And as I said before, I moved a few times when I was a kid,
Yeah.
and it came out when I was living in Kettering, and the singles kept coming even after we moved to Worthington.
Yeah.
And when you're a kid, that seems like a really long amount of time. Like, that's a major demarcation in my life for me.
Sure.
But I mean, it was 85 when we moved to Worthington.
Yeah.
So, you start with Born in the USA being on MTV when you live in one house, and then Glory Days is on TV when you live in another house. So it just feels like this album lasted forever. Shout out to John Sayles, by the way.
Yeah.
And so one of the
Yeah.
songs I really love off that record is I'm on Fire.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably my favorite song on that record. Because even though I own that record and I love it, but at the time it wasn't anything that really spoke to me. It was just such a major part of the zeitgeist and a soundtrack to everyone's lives at the time.
Sure.
And it was unavoidable, but extremely enjoyable. So it was something that was just part of your life. It was on the radio. Everybody knew the songs. So it was right there. So I think that's when I really became conscious of Bruce being Bruce.
It's interesting, at least for us fans, is in Peter Carlin's book, Bruce, he talks about that, the River had some commercial success and Hungry Hard, and then he came back with Nebraska, and the record company's kind of, oh, this is interesting. This isn't kind of what we were hoping as a follow-up, but
Right.
Oh, let's talk about murder sprees and this darkness, and then when he started bringing songs from Born in the USA, basically a record company, this is a little more like it, what we were looking for.
Yeah.
And it does seem that I think it's a maybe just a happy accident, right? But this was what he was feeling, and at the time it ended up hitting people's choices, in their musical enjoyment. So and Bruce snobs will say, oh, Born in the USA, and the truth was it's a great album filled with great songs. And and it is kind of funny that when he performs live, he doesn't always, he picks only certain songs from that album. It's not like he plays all the hits, because he has such a diverse background. That's good.
Yeah, you can't just play all of that, because that's going to be half your show.
Have you ever seen Bruce perform live?
Nope.
It's on your bucket list.
Yeah, it's Big Fat Goose Egg. Yeah, because I didn't really start, like you mentioned, we talked a little about Tunnel Love.
Yeah.
For on one of the Doctor Who shows we did together, and because I really didn't start digging into Bruce until Tunnel Love came out. Like, Springsteen fans are usually a little shocked by that Tunnel of Love was my gateway into Springsteen. But I was 11 when that came out. And there was something about Brilliant Disguise that really did speak to me, because that sort of those, we call them tween years now, like the ages of 10 to 12. I'd been through a typical childhood experience where somebody's your best friend one day and then the next day they hate you.
Right.
Very much like the Judy Blume book Blubber, where it's like you think you're friends with someone and the next day they're just not talking to you. And so the idea of not knowing someone that you think you know actually resonated with me, even as an 11-year-old. Really, really resonated with me. Same thing with Two Faces. The whole story of, this is making all these promises. And I had Bruce Springsteen's marriage to Julianne Phillips
Right.
was probably second only to Madonna's marriage to Sean Penn in the
Hmm.
tabloids at the time.
Right.
So, and even I remember as a kid thinking these people don't go together. There's just something that doesn't go together with them. And then they divorced, and then this record comes out, and then you have a song like that. And I think, hearing that as such a young kid, that was kind of a cautionary tale for me. Growing up, like, don't be with a man like this. If he shows you two faces, and one of them's horrible,
Yeah.
that horrible side isn't worth it. Like, if the other face is great, but if that horrible face is ever going to come out, it's not going to be worth it for you.
So
So,
I really think that shows a lot of depth, the young Xan, because often, I've had people say you can't appreciate Tunnel of Love till you've had your heart broken a couple of times.
mhm,
And I do think it is, um, when Bruce announced that he was doing an autobiography, there were a couple of things I wanted out of the album. I wanted, one, him talking about breaking up the band. I'm just fascinated by
mhm.
that. How do you're at the top of the world, and then you tell these guys that have been your warriors, forever, like, hey, I want to go try something new. By the way, you're fired. Um,
Mhm.
and then
Kind
also,
of.
yeah, yeah. Um, and then, and by the way, little Steven has said this in interviews, and Bruce's too, that in fact, little Steven will tell other band members, don't break up.
Mhm.
Take a break, take a leave of absence,
Make
go
a solo record,
do
but
all your
don't
solo
do that.
albums, but
Yeah.
don't officially break, because the reality is there's room for all of it, and you
Mhm.
can do that. And I also was curious about his marriage, because he doesn't talk about it much. And
No.
and in his autobiography, he talks about being at dinner with Julianne and staring at her, going, she is beautiful, she is stunning. Why is she with me? She is going to figure out sooner or later that I'm not worthy of her. And he totally takes 100% blame for the failure of the marriage. um, and I think that's interesting. A young Xan saw, really, these two don't belong together, and then him and Patty just clicked, and
Right.
been married, now then to so many years.
Yeah, it's 30 years this year. Um I remember a specific photo of the two of them, him and Julianne, where she is dressed like a model, like an 80s model. She's very put together,
Yeah,
she's gorgeous. Julianne, that hair. I mean, she's got fantastic hair.
right,
And he's next to her in his unkempt Springsteen hair. He looks sweaty. He looks like he's kind of probably been drinking. He looks like he's talking to somebody. Like,
yeah,
Bruce is a very animated type of guy.
right,
And he's wearing a suit with a bolo tie.
right,
He kind of looks like the cover of Tunnel of Love.
yes,
And she's kind of looking to the other side, and he's got his arm around her, but he's talking really animated to somebody else. And I'm like, these two don't match. They don't match. They probably love something about each other, but they don't match.
it's interesting.
And Julianne became a little bit more pop culture noticeable in the 90s when she was on the show Sisters.
Yes, I remember Sisters.
Yeah, and I would occasionally watch that because I'm a big Swoosie Kurtz fan.
Sure.
um and even then I just remember thinking, like, I think this is probably better for her. Like, that she's known for Sisters rather than being Bruce Springsteen's wife. I think that's so much better for her. And as you were talking too about the breakups of the E Street Band, it's like, why would you get rid of that? As Springsteen said when the E Street Band was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, because Springsteen was inducted first, but not the E Street Band. And
Right.
little Steven was at his house saying, "What the hell, man? Why is this happening?"
Yeah.
And he's like, well, you know, I am Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah.
This is what the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is saying, blah, blah, blah. And Steven said, but Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, that's the legend.
Yes.
And he's right. And he's like, okay, well, you guys are fired, but I'm doing this record. Danny, Roy, you want to come help me do keyboards and pianos and stuff on this,
Right.
please?
Yeah.
Like, it's still, it's like the Tom Petty record, that his solo record that he did, that still has everybody on it.
Right.
That, you know, Full Moon Fever still has pretty much everybody on it. I don't remember if Stan is on it too, but you know, Mike Campbell's there, Howie Epstein's there,
Yeah.
Ben Montencha's there. You're like, how is this not a Heartbreakers record? But I think with Springsteen,
yeah.
I think this one was probably too personal for him to have the E Street Band with him on this. So that's probably where his mindset was. But yeah, it was a dumb idea to say, okay, no more E Street Band.
Well, and then he talks about it in the Broadway show that you could watch on Netflix, right? That a band, 1 + 1 = 2, but on a band, 1 + 1 = 3. And that's where the magic happens. That the sum of the parts is greater than them individually, you know, and that, and he did talk about that, when he introduced them, right, that the Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band makes it something, you know, greater than themselves.
Yeah. And some of the stuff that I really love off of Tunnel of Love is E Street.
Yeah.
Because, like, you know, soundtrack nerd, gonna keep bringing up the soundtracks forever. One of my favorite soundtrack composers is Thomas Newman.
Okay.
Especially his 80s work. Things like Real Genius and Man with One Red Shoe, and not surprisingly, Desperately Seeking Susan.
Yeah.
And he's very keyboard centric.
Right.
And I played the piano, and so keyboards and music always really spoke to me. And the keyboards on Tunnel of Love remind me a lot of Thomas Newman keyboards.
Okay.
And same thing with Tougher Than the Rest. That's so keyboard heavy.
Yeah.
And that's a thing that I think a lot of older Springsteen fans in the 80s were like, what the hell is all of this synthesizer stuff? This is the 80s. Why, you know, this record is very 80s. It is very slickly produced.
Yes.
But looking back on it, I don't feel like there are some times when keyboards in rock, especially somebody like Springsteen, where you have had, you know, Danny and Roy forever. Yeah. So we know keyboards, we know piano, keyboards, Hammond, all of it. It doesn't feel tacked on to me. It does feel slickly produced, a little more slickly produced, but it doesn't feel tacked on the way something like the keyboards in when Iron Maiden did it on Son of a Seventh Son, or when Judas Priest does it on their Turbo record.
Right.
Same thing with Jump by Van Halen. Those are iconic keyboards. They don't feel tacked on. And that's how I felt about this one. That, you know, Tougher Than the Rest is very, very keyboardy.
Yes.
But again, but the keyboards and piano and organ on Tunnel of Love and Tougher Than the Rest are Danny and Roy.
Yeah.
So
and they make it work.
Yeah.
One of the questions I often ask is stories from the road. You know, like any stories, and you've already shared a couple of concert stories, but do you ever travel with Chris when he's doing conventions?
I do. I travel with him most of the time, unless for some reason I can't.
Yeah.
There was one time he did a show and I had a wedding, so he had to go to the show by himself, and then I did the wedding.
Yeah.
So
Xan's spouse Chris is a comic book artist that has worked on some amazing books, and so I'm just curious, do you have any fun stories either on concerts or going to conventions you might want to share with the audience?
Okay, well, yeah, because I already told you my Elvis dancing story, which is the ultimate.
Yes, that's the best
concert. Yeah, the next best concert story I have. I'll start with the concert ones, and then I'll tell the convention ones. But the next best concert story that I have is I went to New Jersey to visit my friend Shelly on my birthday, and she took me to see Colin Hay, who is still one of my all-time favorites. Colin Hay from Men at Work, and we got to go to the famous Maxwell's in Hoboken, and that was, you know, it's gone now and it's an iconic place, and I'm glad I was able to go. But I was standing up real close to the stage, and somehow he heard something I said to her, and he talked about it, and then I made a comment back, and somehow I was able to tell him that it was my birthday.
Okay.
And so Colin Hay sang happy birthday to me.
Nice.
And then took my request. He's like, is there a song you want to hear? And I said, yes, I want to hear Waiting for My Real Life to Begin. And he played it. So that was one of the best birthday presents I've ever gotten.
That is, I had heard that song on, they played it on some TV show.
Scrubs.
Wasn't Scrubs, because I don't, but but anyway, yes. And I remember downloading that song and loving that song. So
yeah,
in fact, that's when you said Colin Hayes, I immediately said Waiting for My
Really?
Real Life to Begin. Yes, I like that. So yes, that's a great choice.
Yeah, so that's a wonderful story. There's so many fantastic convention stories. We've just all had so much fun, and so many, because in the comic book industry, my husband Chris Sprouse, if you want to Google him, he's worked with so many people that he's either never met or only met a couple of times because they live across the globe.
Right.
And so it's great to finally meet people and have dinner with friends that we never see because they live in other places, and stuff like that is always a really, really good time. But probably the weirdest one is Chris and I were in Toronto. We were at a Toronto show, and we were downstairs in the bar because the internet in the room was, they like didn't have Wi-Fi in the room. They just had Ethernet in the room.
Yeah.
So we didn't want to, and there was only one cable.
Right.
And we both had laptops and we both wanted to be online. So we went downstairs in the bar where there was Wi-Fi, and we were just on our computers. And there were two guys at the bar, and they were talking about how TV used to be. And one of them was talking about how, now this concludes our broadcast day. And so when I went up to get drinks, I just said to them, I said, excuse me, I heard you talking about TV. And now that you said broadcast day, now I have the national anthem in my head. Because that's what used to happen.
Absolutely.
This concludes our broadcast day, and they would play Star Spangled Banner, and then the TV would just be fuzzy. It would just be static.
Right.
And those two guys were John Delancey and Bruce Boxleitner.
Oh, how funny.
Bruce Boxleitner, of course, is Tron, and John Delancey, of course, is Q from Star Trek: The Next Generation. So the next morning, when we're all gathering in the hotel lobby to go over to the convention, Bruce Boxleitner's there, and he sees me. He's like, "Are you some sort of a stalker?" Like, and I'm like, "No, I'm just here with my husband. We're going to the show." And I felt really bad. And then he kept making these jokes about me being a stalker.
Yes.
He's like, "Don't say anything in front of her. She's with TMZ." Like, he was, and he had like just broken up with Melissa Gilbert at the time. So I think he was just joking around, but also like, what the hell?
Yeah.
So Chris went up and got me because I was like, I can't get an autograph from him now. It's going to look ridiculous. So Chris went up and said, "Hey, I'm just on a break from my table. My wife is really sorry." He's like, "Oh my God, please tell her I'm kidding. Please tell her I'm sorry." And so then I went up later and I said, "Hi." And he's like, "Hey." Yeah. I said, "Listen, I just got to tell you, I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable, but I'm from the Midwest, and when I'm in a bar, I don't know any strangers."
Right.
And he just said, "Well, that's two things we have in common."
So, that's great.
Now Bruce Boxleitner does not think I'm a stalker. So
that's
a pretty good one. And then the time we were in, this is actually Little Steven related. We went to Johannesburg to do a convention, and after the show, the organizer of the show took so much fantastic care of us. It was wonderful. It was a dream trip. I cannot thank them all enough. Thank you, Patrick, for everything you did. they sent us to Sun City.
Oh, wow.
And so as I was there, my friend Shelly just kept sending me pictures of little Steven because, I'm
Yeah.
not going to play Sun
Just
City.
gonna say yes.
Yeah. So we went on a game drive through Johannesburg National Park, where you're in a guy, you're in a Jeep with a guy, and you're seeing all kinds of animals, and which was unbelievably outstanding. It was just out of this world fabulous. Elephants, giraffes, leopards, lions, everything. It was incredible. And while we were doing this drive, there was another tour that broke down. Their Jeep broke down. They had a
Yeah.
flat tire. They had to change the tire. And when that happens, when you're on the game drive, all of the guides and the drivers, they descend on that one person to get that car out of there as fast as possible, and they will
Sure.
not let you leave the Jeep because now you are a sick animal
Yes.
out there. And we look over, and the people in the broken down Jeep are the cast of American Gods.
Oh, how
So
funny.
I've got this great photo of because we looked at them, we were like, oh hey, convention people, and they waved at us and we waved at them. And so I have this great picture of this broken down Jeep with Ricky Whittle just mugging for the camera.
That's great. That's awesome. That sounds
Yeah.
so good. Well, great. All right. I know you have a pinball tournament to get to,
Hmm.
so I'm not going to keep you too much longer. Um, is there anything I should have asked you that I haven't, Zan?
Anything you should have asked me? That's a good question. Well, you sent me some questions that you were going to ask me, and you said songs you hope to hear live sometime.
Yes.
Um, and I would have to say two of the people that I absolutely love and have never been able to see live are Simple Minds and Kate Bush.
Okay.
So hopefully someday I will hear Simple Minds somewhere in summertime, and Kate Bush's Cloud Busting.
So I don't know if Linda will hear this because I think you've seen her. She's wandering around, but um, we were talking about seeing people live, and I don't remember
Hmm.
how we got to it, but I said, so are you telling me that if Kate Bush toured, you would not? Because Linda's never seen her, obviously,
Yeah,
and
obviously, yeah.
Linda's like, okay, you got me. Yes, like yes, I would.
Yeah.
If it would not put us in financial straits, there would
Hmm.
not be. There would be. I would spend a lot of money to go hear Kate Bush, and I said, and yes, and I would send you for that very
Yeah.
reason. So absolutely, yeah,
Yeah, I'm at the point now where if Simple Minds tours the North America, I will
yeah.
find a way to get there, because they actually were in the last sometime in the last 20 years they were in Cleveland, and I was not in Ohio. There
Oh
something
wow.
was going on and I was not there. And my friends Irma and Mark
Hmm.
were able to see that London show, that Before the Dawn London show that she
Yeah.
did, like that 3 nights. They were able to go to that, and oh my God, I was so happy for them.
Yes.
They
Yes.
got to go.
Well, they just, as we're recording this, Bruce is back on Broadway. He will, I think tonight might be the premiere, if not the next couple of days. And word has broke that he's changing it up slightly.
Mm.
He's taking away 3 songs and adding 3 new songs instead of
Oh,
Brilliant Disguise. Him and Patty are doing Fire together,
that'll
and
be cool.
that would be very cool. He is doing instead of Ghost of Tom Joad, he's doing 41 Shots, American Skin, and then
Hmm.
the song I'll See You in My Dreams, which is what From Letter to You, his newest album, he's doing that instead of Born to Run, which will be a little strange that though
That's
I, when when he was doing acoustical shows for Devils and Dust, he did not do Born to Run, so that isn't certainly
that makes sense. Yeah, that
unprecedented.
makes
But
sense.
yeah, so
That's
I
disappointing. For me, my favorite Springsteen song is "Born to Run."
yeah,
It's my favorite song and my favorite record.
yeah,
And that would be a hard one. I think that would be bittersweet for me to see live. I think because the big man is my favorite E Street member, with
Sure.
Roy and Danny as close seconds.
Right.
Roy mostly because I'm a huge Jim Steinman and Meatloaf fan. I love
Right.
Roy.
Yeah.
But Clarence has always been my favorite. He just has so much personality, and to
Yeah.
see somebody not Clarence play that sax solo, I think I would just cry. Like, I love that I'm seeing this song live, but oh, I miss you, Clarence, so much.
Well, it was funny, right? When after Clarence passed, then the Wrecking Ball tour, they ended up having, a horn section because they didn't even want to try. And
No.
then, and Clarence's nephew, Jake, has stepped up and it does a wonderful job.
Yeah.
But I think that being a relative of Clarence's helps among E Street
Mhm.
fandom.
I think
So
so, because how do you
yes,
replace the big man?
right.
I mean,
Yeah.
you just can't. I mean,
Yeah. And,
that's
and
one of my all-time favorite album covers.
yeah.
And I thought I had this record and I can't find it. I don't
Oh
know what
no.
happened to it. But as I told you, I'm a big Jim Henson Muppet fan.
Yeah.
But the cover of the record Born to Add,
Yes.
the Sesame Street album Born to Add,
Yes.
um, is the cover of Born to Run, but it's Muppets instead.
Right.
It's and the big man and Clarence is a Cookie Monster, is dressed like
Yes.
Clarence with a saxophone. It's
Yeah.
so fabulous.
That is just so perfect. That is, you've made pop culture,
Yes.
awareness when Sesame Street is.
When Cookie Monster dresses up like you,
Yes, absolutely.
you are solidly enshrined in pop
Yeah.
culture royalty.
All right. So we're going to end with a Mary question as always. So for
Mhm.
those of you who are listening to your first episode of Set Listing Bruce because you're a huge Xan Sprouse fan, let me explain the Mary question to you. Jay Armstrong is a retired honors English teacher, but when he was still teaching, every year he would take his seniors, his honors English class, and they take the song Thunder Road and they would break it down as if it was a poem. They would look at the lyrics and the imagery that Bruce is doing. They talk about the themes. They would compare it to Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken. And at the end of the 2 days, Jay asks his class, does Mary get in the car? So, Xan, that is your question. At the end of Thunder Road, does Mary get in the car?
Yes, but I hope they don't stay together forever.
Okay. You want to expand a little?
Yeah, so I think she gets in the car, but I hope they break up eventually,
Okay.
because they both need to get out of town, but they also don't need to be together forever. They are what each other needs right now, and I hope they stay friendly. But I feel like they're young, even though they're not getting any younger.
Yeah.
And you can tell that he's not that into her with, you're not the beauty. What is it? You're not a beauty, but I don't mind. Or how does
Yeah,
that line go?
you're not a beauty, but hey, you're all right, which is the
Yeah,
reason
hey,
why
you're
Linda hates the song. She's like, that is just fun. So, yes.
right. I mean, and as much as I love the song Fire, it's a little rapey. I mean,
Yes.
it's a little
Yes.
problematic, but
Yes.
it's better when it's Elmer Fudd, because he's not getting
Well,
anything.
and
But
the same concern you're talking about, I'm on fire. Hey, little girl, is your daddy home? Can be
right,
creepy as hell
it
if you
can be
aren't.
very, very creepy,
Yes.
and but so they're what each other needs right now. But
Yeah.
if they stay together forever, they're going to create their own rut in whatever new town they find.
Okay. I like that.
And so it's kind of like, I hope they get it. I feel like if there were another verse to this, it would be the praying for the end of time verse in Paradise by the Dashboard Light.
Okay.
Like, okay, we got out of this town together, but now we're just in our own quagmire again. So I hope they get out of town. They maybe have some adventures together, but then they go their separate ways and have great memories of each other and stay friendly. But they'll start the cycle over again if they stay together, I think. So yes, she gets in the car, but they break up.
There you go. Very nice. All right. So, Xan, where can people find you if they want to hear more of your fabulous work or reach out to you?
Well, I am on social media as Udinax19 on Instagram and Twitter, which was recently hacked. So if you follow me on Twitter, I apologize that I that you got offered a deal on Ray-Ban sunglasses. That was not me. I have changed my
Isn't that
password.
just so weird? People gets
Yeah,
hacked and do that. Yes.
that's so strange. That was not me.
Yes.
Ray-Bans are fine, but I don't care if you buy them or not. And I'm Xan Sprouse on Facebook. And if you want to hear more podcasting stuff by me, Charles Skaggs and I do Drunk Cinema, where we discuss our favorite movies over our favorite adult beverages, um, which is why I do things like mix up the letters in EP and D, because I did that podcast last night. Um, and we also, Charles and I also do Ghostwood, the Twin Peaks podcast, where we talk about everything tangentially related to Twin Peaks and tangentially related to David Lynch. And DJ Nick and Rachel Friend and I do Gold Standard, the Oscars podcast, where we are going through chronologically year by year every movie that has won the Best Picture Oscar. We started in 1928 with Wings, and our most recent episode that is up now is 1954's On the Waterfront. So we're going to do 1955 next time, which is Marty. So we're slowly working our way through the years of that.
Yes, and I am trying to work my schedule so I can join you guys for Marty.
That would be
So,
great.
yeah.
That would be great. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
such a sweet movie.
Yeah, so we I was able to join you guys on Casablanca. I was going to do a
Yep.
couple others, and then I got sick, so I'm hoping to get back and join you guys for Marty.
We hope so too, and hopefully, whatever else you want to talk about.
That sounds great.
You can come on with us.
Well, Xan, this was great. I appreciate you taking time and visiting with me. This was a lot of fun.
This was great. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, listeners, you stay safe. Go get vaccinated if you haven't been vaccinated yet. There's no reason not to. Continue to let's social distance. And if you're not vaccinated, remember your mask, and let's all be good to each other, because that's the only way we're going to get through this. For now, take care, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye. Doing a podcast at times can be a one-way conversation, and I hate that. So please let me know what you like and don't like about the work I'm doing. You can reach the podcast via email at setlistingbruce@gmail.com. The show is on Twitter at setlistingbruce, and my personal Twitter is at JesseJacksonDFW. We have a website, www.setlistingbruce.com. From there, you can find links to other Springsteen podcasts as well as other music-themed podcasts. We have a page devoted to our own SLB All-Star Band. These are guests who have been on the podcast more than 3 times. There is a link to our store where you can purchase Set Listing Bruce shirts, as well as a Mary Question t-shirt. There is a link to our Patreon page where you can sign up to help support the podcast financially. We have different levels and different rewards based on your support. If you don't have any extra cash, and right now, who does? You can support the podcast by subscribing via your favorite podcast player and leaving us a review. The more reviews we have, the easier it is for people to find us. And please tell a friend about the podcast, especially if they love Bruce or music, because it will make a difference.
You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. Set Listing Bruce is part of the Southgate Media podcast group. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.